Everybody's interested in the supernatural, and if you're not, you need to be, because things are going to get very interesting in the future. You don't want to miss this broadcast. We're talking about stuff I haven't shared before, journeys in the supernatural, journeys in the spirit realm, and how it all applies to you and the way that you're wired to manifest something extraordinary. You don't want to miss this. Because I was with Kim Clement, and we would travel together, and I was always amazed at how he could kind of like hear. This is a remarkable prophet from South Africa, and he had an ability to hear God, and I've known false prophets too. I mean, say what you will about Peter Popoff. I'll mention him by name. I remember I went down to Philadelphia one time at the insistence of a friend, and Peter Popoff had everybody fill out these prayer cards before he'd minister. And of course, I wrote there, and I had terrible handwriting, and so I wrote down the name one of my dad's saved. His name was Carl. And so I wrote down Salvation of Father. I wrote Carl. And he points at my table and he says, you're praying for someone. And I'm so naive. I'm thinking, yes. And he goes, Earl. See, my handwriting was so bad. It looked like Earl. And I go, huh? He goes, Earl. And he's saying it like because he had an ear device, they found out, that he had in his inner ear. So he had a little ear plant, and his wife would be backstage reading what table the cards came from and, what the supposed word of knowledge was. He's masquerading like he's hearing from God. So he's going, he goes, who's your father? I go, Carl. And I remember thinking, I was so naive back then. I was thinking, my gosh, even the Lord doesn't know my dad's name. He thinks it's Earl. But I said, Earl, I knew an Earl that was a burner mechanic. He used to clean our burner. I go, Earl, the burner mechanic? He goes, no, your father. I go, oh, that's Carl. He goes, Carl. And I go, yeah, okay, that's my dad. So then he goes, well, come up here. And I'll tell you what happened, man. This guy had a ring. And the ring was a big metal ring. And it must have had some voltage or something that was tied to like a little electric thing, because he put his hand on my head and it gave me a headache, and it actually was a shock hit my head. And I got the worst headache off of that. I went home that night and I said, man, Lord, you don't know my dad's name. It's Carl. And I got a headache from going to that meeting. And there was something weird about that. Well, then I read an expose by the amazing Kreskin, or some guy that debunked fake ministries.
James
and
Randi? James Randi, the amazing Randy?
Yeah, amazing Randy. He's the guy that did it, not Kreskin, Randy. And he did a debunking in the Philadelphia Inquirer, saying, and they were able to actually record on a wavelength the wife talking to him about what the cards said. So it got fully exposed. So if anyone could be skeptical about so-called prophetic hearing, it would be me. Now, a lot of prophets prophesy in generic kind of like abstract ways. And so the prophecy is kind of a mosaic. And you can read into it, like a Rorschach test, what you want. So some do that. But the ones that I really appreciate are the ones that are very specific and go out on a limb. They may hit it or they may miss it. Kim was one of those guys. If he hit it, you forgot any miss, because he hit so clearly. And he never missed on words of knowledge. The phenomenal stuff was that he picked up on information supernaturally. Where he could miss it was his interpretation of what he heard. And so this is what I learned from Rick Joyner and Mike Bickle, both of who have stewarded like Major League ball players. They had Bob Jones and Paul Jackson and Paul Kane and all these different prophets. And I was with them and I said, well, tell me in your history of working with prophets, where does it go off? And Bickle said it brilliantly. He said a prophet can miss it in hearing something but not having the right interpretation for what it means. Or they could hear it and have the timeline mixed up for what it means. There's several ways in which there could be an error in interpretation or an error in hearing itself. So all this kind of fascinated me as I was watching this. I was with Kim, however, and I noticed he had no ear device. He had nothing like that. He actually operated like William Branham. And when he said to me that when we get into this place where he could literally, and I've been on these small meetings, you know, in churches where it was like stories you would hear because they weren't on the news. They weren't being broadcast live like on TBN. But like, I remember one meeting, for instance, we were in Pennsylvania, no, not Pennsylvania, Providence, Rhode Island. And he was at a church, and there was a packed house. And Kim suddenly yells out the name, Waddell. Nobody knows what the heck he's talking about. And he yells it out again, Waddell. And up from the back of the church, like almost like barefoot, comes like a street person, wanders up on the platform. And Kim says, the Lord is healing your blood disease right now, and you should be totally healed. Boom. I find out, nobody knows who the guy wanders off. And it's like, well, how did you get that name, Waddell? He said, I just heard it. Come to find out, the guy comes back to church weeks later, dressed up, like clean shaven, suit. He said, I walked into this service. He said, I don't even know how I got here. I'm from Providence. He said, I came here full-blown HIV positive. That guy from South Africa calls out my name, calls it out, and someone says, is that you? Go up there. He said, and all I know is I got a clean bill of health.
Wow. So
he had a miracle gift, and he would hear God like that. That was when he was at his absolute best, and I watched that over and over again. So I'm with him, and I said to him, we were once in Long Island, New York, and I said, decode hearing God, because I noticed that you hear God in different ways. And so, for instance, I would start to interview him after the ministry, and I'd say, I started watching, this is kind of strange. Some of you guys are going to find this a little bit, I won't say weird, but there's a science to the prophetic. And the science says there's a way to comprehend how to hear and how this works. And so Kim said to me, he said, when I'm on a platform, he says, here's what's happening. He said, I'm getting a name for someone, and so I hear them, but I bring them up. He said, I don't always know what the Lord's going to say, but I've got them. I've heard their name, and they're now on the platform. He said, I have a challenge because I can hear the voice of the person. He said, the person has a voice. So many times a prophet hears what the cry of the heart is, and they're prophesying what's in the heart of the person. And the person's having an experience, but there's almost like a broadcast, like a neuro Wi-Fi that's going, and they're picking up on it. And the heart has a voice, and the person's got this cry. And so he said, I have to separate the voice of the person from me. He said, but then, he said, there's the devil. The devil will try to say something almost mimicking the voice of God. And I have to discern that and push that out of the way. He said, then there's my own voice. My own soul has a voice. He said, and it could be anxiety or performance anxiety, like you better say something, you better do something. The audience is wondering. He said, I have to push that out of the way. He said, now the only voice that remains is God. I never forgot that statement. The only voice that remains is God. That means he removed himself, the other person, the devil. Think about that. And then God's voice is there. So it's the still small voice of God. How many of you have ever had an experience where you did something and you knew you shouldn't have done it because there was like a voice telling you not to do it, but you did it anyway? So there's that, what's that intuition you have about don't do something and you do it. That intuition is part of the neuro Wi-Fi that you've got. It's that inner kind of hearing. Now, if you break apart the anatomy of the receiver, how you're designed like a radio, then you realize that there's part of you that is wired to pick up what's in the atmosphere around you. And weak people, you seen that Jedi scene in Star Wars where Jabba Hutt is sitting there, the big, bloated frog, and one of the weird guys he's got with this, long tail on his head, he goes out and meets Luke Skywalker, and Luke Skywalker is doing his Jedi mind trick on him. He says, bring me to Jabba. I must meet Jabba. I have something important to tell Jabba Hutt. And the guy was told, do not let Luke Skywalker in. But Luke Skywalker put the thoughts in his head. And so he comes in, he leans over to Jabba Hutt, and he goes, the Jedi is here. He has something to tell you. And Jabba Hutt goes, you idiot. That's a Jedi mind trick. He's controlling you, and he shoves the guy away. Well, you'd be surprised how susceptible people are to voices. They could be in an atmosphere. They could be around them. Someone else, think about this. This is going to sound a little weird here, but someone else, there are people that have spiritual spirits in them, spirits on them. Like you look at like Hitler mesmerizing a mass, a nation by a voice. Now he's one with that voice, but that voice is working through him. There are people that come under the power of the mesmerizing presence of others. And if they're spiritually wired and you're not strong, you're coming under their influence. So you see, like with cults, Charles Manson and stuff, they interview Squeaky Fromm and all these other people that were doing his assassination. One of them tried to kill Gerald Ford, if you remember that. And when they got separated from him and in prison, and then they got kind of decoded, or like if one of them would get saved, they'd say they were hearing his voice. It's like he had this hypnotic effect on them. Why I'm saying that is this, that if you're not filled with the Holy Spirit, then you can be subject to other people's spirits. Other people's power can have a disproportionate influence. You think you're being objective, but it's like a Jedi thing. Their thoughts are really bombarding you, and you're kind of compliantly going along and don't realize you're not exercising your own brain on the subject. When I was with Kim, I would observe and then start to work with hearing God. And part of the apparatus God gave every believer is your own spirit, your three parts, spirit, soul, and body. Your body picks up on sensory information. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it warm? Or you might have a feeling. You might have a feeling in your gut, a gut feeling about something. That's sensory. But your soul also picks up on stuff, and that's your mental area. That's where you could be picking up on what other people are saying, and it's kind of like broadcasting into you, and you're under that influence. But your spirit is where God's Spirit speaks to you. That's the deepest part of you. And that's where this thing called intuition is. One of the most uncanny evidences of intuition that I know of is a woman whose name is Martha, that I was once pastoring in a Philadelphia church. She's married to a husband who was a professor, and her husband was having an affair. And she was praying about this and praying about it because she wanted to have her husband get saved and have me counsel him. And I said, well, do you have evidence that he's cheating on you? She said, no, I'm praying about it. I just know it. I said, well, you have to ask the Lord to confirm it. I mean, for me to confront him or talk to him. Well, she comes back to me. She said, he's coming to meet you. He's freaked out. I go, why? The Lord told me the hotel and the room. And I went up and knocked on the door, and he was horrified to answer. I caught him with the woman. He asked whether I had a private investigator. She said, no, you know me. I've been telling you need to get to church. God told me. Well, that put the fear of God on him. He came in and got saved in my office. Wow. So that's what you call women's intuition. Ladies, I'll tell you what, we're in a realm where you have to know how you're wired. That's spirit, soul, and body. And there's other people's voices. There's demonic voices. There's your voice, and then there's the voice of God. And the reason why it's a still small voice is you have to quiet the other ones. Now, I said being filled with the Spirit. Being filled with the Spirit isn't enough. This book is the most important recalibration mechanism. It's kind of like your GPS. I get my GPS, and it's like, it's constantly, recalibrating and sending me by a new word. This book is the Word, and the Word will program your brain to be able to automatically observe and affirm when it's the voice of God, because God will speak in accordance with his thoughts. His thoughts are here in 66 books. And as you read and meditate on these books, it creates a hypersensitivity. Intuitively, you start to hear more accurately what God's voice sounds like. All right, so we've dropped a lot of science there on this, but I want to go somewhere in terms of so many people are listening to prophets nowadays. We might as well do a broadcast on War Room with Bannon's talking about, he's using language I'm glad to hear him say. He says it's providential that Trump didn't get back in office because now the left is being exposed. All the cards are being turned over. Well, all right. He's using language which is fourth turning, great awakening, providential. Let's talk prophetic. What is God doing? Mercedes?
I just have questions because I just want to make sure if we're talking about spiritual gifts. So prophecy is a spiritual gift that when you're filled with the Holy Spirit, God gives you gifts. Now, would you say there's a difference between a word of knowledge, which it sounds like what that lady received, which is this location at this time, versus prophecy? Because when one of the things as you're reading, I'm reading, 1 Corinthians 14, but it talks about prophecy is there for edification of the church. And I mean, Paul goes so far as to say, you like follow after love and desire spiritual gifts, but especially that you may prophesy. And he says, but he would even exhort us to prophesy over speaking in tongues because it builds others up. And so I was just wondering if you could offer maybe just some insight into the actual gift of prophecy versus a word of knowledge, because I even think in your first story where the guy was pretending to hear the Spirit, or I think about, like Sean Boltz who will get like a phone number, or, it's almost like there's a word of knowledge that's given and then an edification word that's delivered to the person.
Yeah, and so like you're going into interesting territory. So in the first century church, there was such a percolating of the supernatural that they actually, unlike nowadays, where it's almost like we go to church to be inspired by a speaker and by a worship service, we're almost like an automatic pilot. It doesn't build a great muscle for believers because you're not having to hear a thing. And if the sermon's done for you, it's kind of like easy bake oven. It's cooked for you, stuck into your mouth, and you just got to eat it and you like it. But 1 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about this fireworks that would be going on in the Corinthian church. Now, concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I don't want you to be ignorant. So the first thing is, you ought to look up all the times in the Bible where Paul says, don't be ignorant, because obviously there's a potential to be ignorant. You know that you were Gentiles carried away to these dumb idols, however you were led. He's calling them dumb idols, not being stupid idols, but being dumb. They can't really speak, but yet these would be idols that they would be worshiping. And so he's saying that there are diversities of gifts, verse 4, but the same Spirit. There are differences of ministrations or ministries, but the same Lord. There are diversities of activities, but it's the same God who works all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one of you for the profit of all. So every believer actually should, you talk about investment strategies. We talk about investment strategies with gold and silver and commodities and real estate and what to do in the shaking. The biggest investment strategy you should find is what gift did God give you, because your gift will help you prosper. And you've got something buried in you that most people aren't even manifesting. It says that the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one. So let me give you a list of some gifts, and you ought to be asking God, which ones are you called to start to develop? To one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit. To another, the word of knowledge through the same Spirit. Now, the word of knowledge, I'm going to skip over the word of wisdom for a second. The word of knowledge is the one you mentioned. And that is a specific knowing of something that is knowable that you in the natural could not know. So that means it could be a phone number, an address, the name of a doctor, name of a person, name of a city. Could be the name of a medical condition somebody has. I know one man who made, I don't know, maybe $100 million off of God's voice speaking in his ear, while another guy who was an investment advisor was reading down a list of investments. And as the guy was reading, he hears in his ear, that's it. And then the guy goes on and keeps reading. He goes, stop. No, stop. Read that again. Go back. Guy goes back. Go, that's not it. Go back again. No, that's not it. Go back again. And then he hears, that's it, again in his ear. And that was the voice. The guy, everyone wants to talk to this man because of his success in investing. And I asked him, how did you get that success? He said, God spoke to me and said, that's it. Amen. Now, I don't know if that's a word of knowledge or just hearing the voice of the Lord, but it falls in the category of hearing specifically what God's saying. So knowledge would be information that's available, that you wouldn't know in the natural, but it could be known. To another comes faith by the same Spirit. That's a gift of faith. Now, what would a gift of faith be? Everyone's called to operate by faith. And the Bible says everyone has a measure of faith. You have a measure of faith to believe for the things that God has put in your life. So in a sense, you got to build your faith. You got to get the word in you. You build your faith to believe God. You got to almost draw a target around those things God has called you to believe for. Believing for your salvation of your family. That's in the orbit of the believable. Believing for God's prosperity, believing that God will lead you, believing that God will do these things. That's all in the order of where you're supposed to be. But when it says gift of faith, it's talking about something different. This is when God drops in you the ability to believe for something way beyond your capacity. And God can do it on a team. God dropped in Mercedes that we should go to the Trump Hotel and do one of our big events. I had never in my history risked $200,000 or $300,000 on a single event. Who will go? Can we afford it? I got to secure a whole block of rooms in Washington, D.C. It was going to cost me like $100,000 on a credit card. I didn't want to do it. But I had confidence that she was hearing God. So I don't know whether it was a gift of faith that God put in you, because we hadn't done it before. But I believe that God gave to her a gift of faith and and we had agreed on this word of knowledge the Lord was giving us about the Trump Hotel in Washington. And out of that came peace in me to make the decision as an executive, all right, we're going to go ahead and do it. But I would say that these gifts work in business. The point is, a gift of faith is when you have a certainty about something. In the natural, you have no history of being able to, your faith didn't get built up to that level. You just have a knowing. You know what? I got to make an executive decision right here. This subject on the supernatural has got more juice on it than I thought, and I got to stop because there's so much more that we have to talk about. We only got halfway through the outline that I had, but I'm happy for the interaction with the team. And so we're going to come back with part 2 next. You don't want to miss it.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world. See you tomorrow.
You know, people still ask me all the time, Lance, are you still friends with Mike Lindell? Of course, Mike and I are on a regular first. We just call each other whenever we need each other's encouragement. But, you know, I find that I don't have to call Mike when I'm slipping into these slippers. I have various different styles of Mike slippers. And this one is, of course, the favorite, the gray suede with the snug back on it because it's got the indoor-outdoor sole on it, the 4-ply cushiony interior with the whole fur. The fur is so much like rabbit fur, and then it's got the silk-stitched out exterior. My favorite one for the late night, but during the day I like to slip on. You know, you get in and out of bed real quick. You don't want to have to mess around. You kind of like, you know, if you're like my age, you get up in the middle of the night. Well, this was the one I used in the middle of the night journeys around the house, you know, wandering around, for instance, because this one slips on and slips off so easy. But you know what I love? The bathrobe. It's probably, if you guys, people are telling me now, like, Lance, I've got everything. Well, some of you don't, because I found out that I ordered medium and I should have got large. So, you know, I've got the large bathrobe now on order because I ordered the medium by accident. But we're going to be doing our late night shows, and I'm going to be asking you guys what your preferred Mike Lindell stuff is. MyPillow.com, use promotion code Lance. You can get the same stuff I've got for 40, 50, 60% off. MyPillow.com, and use the code Lance. This guy's such a patriot. We all love him, and we support him 100%. Mike Lindell, we're praying for you.